If you need it. We started our advertising journey about 9 months ago, and we've accelerated pretty quickly, and yeah, excited to be here.
Hi, so my name is Michael Hudson, I'm CEO at PennyBox. We are a games developer and / recent publisher of hyper-casual titles. I mainly focus on the business development side and also get my hand involved in sort of the analytics and ad ops side of things as well with our games.
I'm Joel Livesey. I work for the Trade Desk. We're an omni-channel buying platform, if you ask our marketing team, or a DSP to anyone else. And I look after our supply-side partnerships, so any SSPs and any publishers across EMEA.
Hi, I'm Jonnie Byrne, Managing Director of Fyber, UK and France. We are an app monetization platform specializing in mediation.
Thank you very much. Nice and short and succinct, guys. So can we start, first of all, with the definition? I guess we've got different levels of knowledge in the room. I don't know if anybody saw the first presentation after lunch from Badoo, which was talking about header bidding. If you do, you'll have a much better idea than if you didn't. But Rich, from your perspective, just give us a definition of what you see as header bidding and what you're looking for in a header bidding solution.
I mean, it'd be great when we actually have a good name for it and everyone agrees what that name is. Call it in-app header bidding. I think for us, for Badoo, it means the ability for all demand sources to compete in real time on an impression by impression level. That's the tactical side of it. And then I think more strategically, it's kind of building better partnerships, better transparency, and taking what is a really logical step in operational processes and hopefully seeing some good revenue growth.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, I think for us, it's more transparency between all the ad networks, with us and them bidding for the inventory that we have. It is lessening sort of the workload for us, being sort of a small team at the moment, and allowing us to focus more in depth really on our games and the actual implementation of the advertising within them as well. So hopefully, yeah, it means for us, you know, more revenues, a little bit less work messing around with waterfalls all the time, and being able to produce better games and more high quality traffic for the advertisers.
Okay, so two publisher perspective. Joel, where do you come in on this?
So for the buy side, I would say header bidding's probably been one of the most important changes for programmatic in the last few years, whether it's desktop or in-app, because it means we can compete alongside direct deals, IOs, anything else, and make sure that we can buy the first impression for the first user every day, potentially, whereas the waterfall meant we kind of got people's hand-me-down impressions in a unified auction. We're able to actually compete, and it's a sign of the maturity of programmatic that we're now able to buy against those direct deals and IO buys. And it's super important for any of our agency clients and for us as a business that we're able to do that.
Okay, and finally, Jonnie.
Yeah, for us it's simple. It's a technology, a platform that enables publishers to present all of their ad impressions to all demand sources at the same time. So those demand sources, regardless of their integration, whether it's an API, server-to-server, tag, SDK, they're able to see, evaluate, and then bid on every single ad impression in real time. So our technology, that's basically what it does. Fyber Fairbid allows a unified auction that enables publishers to do exactly that and to enable demand sources to see and evaluate and bid on every single ad impression in real time. And the whole platform is built around monetization through an auction-based environment, moving away from the waterfall completely and allowing much more greater levels of transparency and fairness in the bid.
Okay, and sticking with you, Jonnie, how is it going to shape and impact app monetization going forward?
I think demand sources are going to have access to a lot more inventory that they previously didn't have access to. So things like rewarded video, for example, that's going to be taken out of the waterfall now, and inventory that was tied up in the waterfall will be made available to the marketplace. So there's going to be a lot more competition for that type of format, which obviously increases CPMs, but it also increases yields as well for the publishers. So I think greater demand in formats that previously weren't available to the demand sources.
Okay, Joel.
When header bidding came in a desktop environment probably a couple of years ago, we saw roughly a 30% increase in CPMs year on year for the same inventory. That's not a bad thing, even though I'm sure a lot of buyers in the room would maybe think the increase in CPM is not good. It's actually great because it meant we were able to buy impressions we couldn't buy before, which is why they looked more expensive. We weren't buying, the 30th impression that user saw that day. We were buying the first impression, and I expect the same in-app. We'll see probably the prices we're paying go up, but you're paying for a better impression. So it's, header bidding is huge on that side of things. The downside, I guess, is potentially you see the same impression multiple times, and you definitely see many, many more impressions through a unified auction because you can see it through different paths, which means that only those SSPs and DSPs who are set up to handle that capacity, to handle that increase in QPS or available impressions, are going to win out. Any of the smaller partners in the industry are going to have to be really smart in how they work in a unified auction environment. But it does help those companies that are a bit bigger, have a bit more scale, and hopefully it also helps those who are a bit more transparent because you can see the best route to buy an impression through a unified auction as well.
And in terms of your agencies and advertiser clients, do they? You've had the experience of header bidding on desktop, and it's now coming to mobile in-app. Do they take a sensible approach? When everyone's looking for increased efficiencies, just to say very quickly, well, yeah, they're paying more for the impression, but it's better quality. Do you get any kickback from advertisers and agencies saying, our budget of X is not going to go as far if each impression is now going to cost twice what it costs, in the Waterfall days?
I think the cynical view would be that no agency wants to pay more for anything, even if it is a better thing they're paying for. But it has to be borne out in performance, and we've seen that as well. Conversions improve, click-through rates improve, your reach improves, whatever your KPI is, it should improve if the unified auction is working as it should. If you can buy those better impressions, if you can compete alongside the IOs, then hopefully we'll start seeing IO budgets transition into programmatic, because we can actually make it work, and you can make those kind of big blanket buys much more effective by picking and choosing the impressions you want. And hopefully it should work exactly as it has in desktop, where it's just becoming normal now.
Okay, Mike, back to the publisher's side of things. Other than increased revenues, are there any other inherent benefits you see from header bidding in-app?
Yeah, I mean, with the sort of games that we're making and publishing, sort of the really hyper-casual games, analytics and being really data-driven is really important for us. Spending a lot of time, especially as a small team as we are at the moment, having to sort of mess around with waterfalls, having to, really sort of take the time out of our day to read the data that we get in, or your CPM data and so on, and then setting everyone up in a waterfall how we need to get the most out of it. It takes a lot of time, takes up a lot of resources, and having a solution, a header bidding solution, where basically that's then moved over to the ad networks themselves to actually sort of bid on our inventory, will obviously increase our revenues, but it'll allow us to actually spend more time actually taking a look at the data in our games itself and actually integrating the advertising into the games a lot better, so we can actually offer more valuable users to the buyers at the end of it anyway. Okay.
Rich, anything to be said around transparency? Is there any benefits from that perspective?
I think, yeah, transparency on both sides, buy and sell side, can be pretty massively impacted by this. I mean, for us as a publisher, we work with all the usual suspects, and getting a really high degree of transparency and understanding the true value of our inventory is probably the biggest gain for us. So we want to see, all the buyers, what they bid, potentially even submitted bids, and based on that, that's what we're going to use to inform our pricing strategy. And at the moment, where we are with this really complex waterfall, multiple ad services, you're always slightly in the dark when you're looking at how you're going to optimize and how many times a day you want to change the order of your waterfall, which is totally impractical. So just to add on, I think the operational efficiency is huge, and I think transparency, using that transparency in the pricing strategy is going to be pretty significant in terms of gains.
Okay. Anyone else got anything on that? Joel, did you want to?
Transparency is obviously going to be really important, and we always stress to the buyers that just because someone's doing header bidding or a unified auction doesn't mean they're doing it in the kind of the purest way. you can still prioritize and effectively waterfall within a unified auction. You know, you could prefer one buyer over another. You could prefer one supply source over another as well. So transparency is it still has to be kind of actively gained. You have to talk to the app developers and work out what is the best route to buy that impression still and how they've implemented header bidding, because, you know, it's like me saying I play football. I wasn't playing on Saturday night for a good reason, because I don't do it very well. And there are people who won't do header bidding or a unified auction very well as well.
And Jonnie, I'll just ask you on this, because one of your colleagues wrote a great piece for us a few weeks ago that touched on some of these points, that it looks like header bidding, but it's actually a waterfall, and the mediation platform gets a second look in full knowledge of what won the auction the first time round. So actually it's not quite as level a playing field as it transpires to be. And it was a great piece in raising the issues. I don't recall him having any solutions. So, and you do hear when you read about header bidding, it's not a perfect solution. So how do we solve some of these, iron out some of these creases?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few solutions out in the marketplace. Some of them have basically done a patch. They put an auction on top of a waterfall, which isn't really a pure header bidding solution. We feel at Fyber that you know, to have a full, transparent, unified auction, you have to have it in a RTB environment, so an auction-based, and building a platform from the ground up that really gears itself to monetizing the inventory in that way. If any of the demand sources are in that waterfall underneath that patch, they're going to be at a disadvantage. So you're back to the old waterfall solution again, where not all demand is being given equal opportunity to evaluate and bid on every single impression. And there are some competitors out there that are kind of marketing a hybrid solution, which again doesn't make sense for us. If you're going to go into in-app header bidding and knock over the waterfall, you can't then have an auction on top of an existing waterfall. It's counterintuitive. So if any of those if any of the competition are talking to you guys, then I suggest you walk away swiftly.
I think it's for those people that don't think programmatic's complicated enough. Let's just have another layer of complexity when you think you find a solution to a problem. Bring back the problem as part of the solution. And if you're going to keep a waterfall in an in-app header bidding solution, there's got to be some sort of advantage for that supplier to keep the waterfall in place. You can make up your own assumptions about what those might be, but it goes against everything we believe in. Building a solution from the ground up that only does auction-based seems to be the way forward for us, and most of the publishers we spoke to, in fact all of them, have said that's the way it should be. No, just stick with me on this one. I'm sure we've all been for nice days out in the countryside, seen beautiful waterfalls, maybe swam at the bottom of them. Waterfalls getting a very bad press here today. Are there any circumstances in which a waterfall scenario actually makes more sense than a header bidding solution?
I think there's an idealistic view that the waterfall is going to go away very quickly. I think the reality is going to be really publisher dependent, and I think there are publishers that maybe unified auction or whatever terminology we all end up agreeing on actually might not be the quick solution. There might still be some evangelization required. There might still be this long tail of impressions that actually don't get much of an uplift. And I think that transitional period will tell most publishers whether they're going to go 100% all in, and that's going to be the solution, and there are enough ad networks and demand sources that agree and all plug into a single standardized methodology, or we're going to end up with this kind of crazy hybrid where you still have ad ops going through hundreds of line items and everything else, and then you also have a part solution for unified auction or header bidding.
Okay. Anyone else? Mike?
Yeah. Me, I think it's quite sort of partner specific. You know, we'll have certain sort of deals and contracts in place with certain ad networks where a waterfall does make more sense. Where, you know, we'll have them in first fill, they will take up the majority of the sort of traffic and inventory that we do have, and the rest of it, due to the deals that we've got, doesn't really matter. We just have some networks in backfill really, and they kind of do what they do. That's not to say that it's better or it's like, you know, a great solution. It just really depends on sort of deal, I think, that you do have with some networks in place, which might, you know, benefit sort of the user acquisition and sort of scaling side that you have on games. Or apps, anything really. And, you know, if you've got a bit more flexibility, then personally I'll much prefer to do sort of the, you know, the header bidding option and have, you know, that sort of platform where it's open to all and it's kind of free for people to bid and really sort of take advantage of the inventory that you have.
Okay. Just in terms of where we stand, I mentioned this Apodil presentation earlier. They started on the 1st of May, I think she said, and talked about similar increases to what you mentioned earlier, Joel, 20% from the same impressions over the course of a couple of weeks. So I know it's early days, but how early days is it? And I don't care who wants to speak first on that.
I'll go.
Yeah.
It is very early days. We're at the very start of in-app header bidding. Our technology is brand new. It's still in beta testing. There's going to be quite some time before we start seeing any kind of real volume coming through this particular execution. But we've spoken to all of our publishers. All of them really want to get involved. We're in beta, so a lot of the competition. We've asked our publishers to be patient and let us get before they can test our platform. And then once we come into open beta and then into full release, then we fully expect the floodgates to open. Everyone really wants to embrace this technology. It's the fairer way to execute in-app header bidding, which is a flat and fair auction. So we fully expect next year to be the kind of landmark year when the revenues really start ramping up, and then the floodgates will open. That's our view anyway.
Okay, Joel?
I would say for the in-app world, you probably don't have the drawbacks that a desktop world had of, maybe salespeople who've been in place for quite a long time and have legacy relationships with a lot of their agencies where, a direct IO pays for their bonus every month or every quarter. And they're happy to keep that ticking along. I think app developers are a bit more nimble and, they're tech businesses by and large, so they're a bit more keen to try new things. Whereas, if you're talking to an old newspaper, they're maybe a bit less keen to change things as fast. So I'd expect adoption to happen a lot more quickly than it has in desktop. It's still not the norm in desktop for, by all publishers. It's only the biggest publishers who are really doing it. And I would expect in-app it should happen much, much more quickly.
Okay. Rich?
Yeah, I'd say that it should happen much more quickly, but, all the network needs to get on board. Because at the moment, if you say you've got 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 networks, over the next 3 months, we need to see 6 or 7 because that's our kind of current setup. And otherwise, you're going to have these really, really long beta processes that run for months and months without the main drivers of revenue in your current ad stack being actually available to include in this process. And I think it's up to publishers and game developers to put the pressure on now because the guys in the middle have built their solutions and now we need to really say, okay, how do we test it? How do we prove real good return on ROI?
Thank you very much. Standing up, yeah, behind the pillar, directly where you can't see him.
Hey, assuming that this kind of works its way through and we finish with like maybe a 2-step waterfall, direct sale, and then header bidding, how do the companies that run the networks start to differentiate themselves, like MoPub and AdMob? Right now, they can sort of differentiate themselves based on ROI and who's buying. Is it who's buying on your network, like which brands you have bidding in your auctions? What differentiates the aggregators at that point in time?
I'll jump in. I'll try. Yeah, I mean, for me personally. I'm not too sort of worried really about sort of the network that's trying to buy the inventory. I think it'll take a little bit of time, of course, as we just said, but once more networks and so on have come on board, more brands are starting to utilise it as well, then really all I'm worried about is our inventory is actually being sold and at the highest possible price, and who takes it, well, that's kind of up to them and up for them sort of bidding the highest price really at the time. I mean, we can actually now, start to utilise the data that we have of our users and, offer that out to the brands and to the ad networks and to show them, specific users that we've got and specific segments and allow them to basically bid for them users within our games. So.
Yeah, I'd say that in our experience, all demand sources have different strengths and weaknesses. It's not always easy to evaluate, but you might see regional strengths or some types of formats or definitely countries definitely have strong difference in terms of performances, and I think that will remain. I think the first step, though, is at the moment, nearly everyone has a slightly different approach to this, and that's probably the first hurdle. And then you're going to have the point where you can look at the differences in terms of strengths and weaknesses in terms of formats, geos, etc.
And I think that's also mirrored on our side where we're buying the inventory. We use header bidding as a means of differentiating the different supply sources as well. If I can buy the same impression through 3 different sources, I want to work out which one works better. Maybe we'll talk to the app developers and publishers to work out which is their preferred route as well. We want to work through the ones that have greater transparency. Maybe those guys who outside of an individual publisher relationship, we see lower fraud rates with, and generally better performance of the actual integration itself as well, like how well the integration is working, how many errors we get, what timeouts we get. Generally, we want to work out what is the best route to buy an impression for our client, the buyer, but also for the publisher at the end of the day as well, and make sure as little money as possible is going missing in between those two.
Yeah, I'd echo the last point about making sure that we're getting the best price or the best yield for our publishers, and making sure that you're connected to all supply, so we're completely agnostic of supply. To your point about the ad networks, making sure that we're connected to the biggest ones. We're launching with 3 of the biggest, and we're adding the other 3 later in the year, and that's really important because you need the scale there, and you need the buy-in from the demand side, and then making sure that we have all the tools in place, to combat fraud, measurability, viewability, all of those things that the brand advertisers on the demand side really need, because when we're talking about moving brand dollars into in-app, that's really what they have to have in place. So making sure that all of the brand safety viewability metrics and vendors that look after that are already integrated in your solution, to make sure that brands feel comfortable about moving money into an app, because that's where the users are. They're spending way more time in app than they are in any other mobile environment. So if the brands are going to follow the users in there, they have to be comfortable with that ecosystem.
Just 2 points you mentioned there, fraud and brand safety. Is there any inherent additional danger from either of those perspectives when you talk about header bidding as opposed to waterfall? If you're talking about getting all the ad networks involved and opening up the demand side, but both sides, then don't you get back to this situation where things are starting to appear in very dodgy, unsafe environments because that's where some users happen to be?
Do you want me to take that first, or do you want to go? Okay. From our perspective, it's making sure that you're aligned with the industry experts, so people like IAS, Double Verify, and White Ops. Thanks, Joel. To make sure that that all of the inventory is brand safe, fraud-free, but you've got high viewability metrics as well. That's really important for brand advertisers. So having all of those connected or integrated into your solution is vital. You have to have it in place, otherwise people just won't buy your inventory.
Yeah, header bidding itself doesn't create or solve any issues around fraud per se, but maybe you could argue that the bigger app developers and publishers are going to be the ones who will put header bidding in place, and a dodgy publisher is probably less au fait with that, probably doesn't have a relationship with someone like Fyber, doesn't have a close relationship with them, and won't be a priority for someone like Fyber to implement their header bidding solution with them. So it should be the bigger guys who use header bidding, and hopefully therefore they are slightly safer environments. Yeah. But the two are largely mutually exclusive. Okay, and Jonnie, you were talking there about brand dollars, getting more brand dollars in that, and we're going to come on to that in a minute, but just to finish off on the waterfall and the idea of transitioning away from the waterfall, it's essentially a unified auction. Mike, what are the tools would you need to make the best of a header bidding solution? These guys hogging the mics.
Other tools to make the best of it, I think kind of like I've said already really, whole sort of purpose for us to utilise this technology is to really sort of simplify and take time away from the waterfall and having to, constantly having to mess around with it all the time to get obviously the best outcome and the best revenues from it. So for us, it means that we can really sort of, dive into the whole analytics side of our games, really focus as well on the user acquisition side for our games. I'm not sure, how many guys watched Voodoo talks earlier and so on as well, and sort of how in-depth they are with the data and how data-driven their user acquisition is, and their games just in general. So for us, it really sort of allows us to, I guess, spend more time on really what matters to sort of grow our company.
So you want to sort of set and forget, really, leave it to its...
Yeah.
in so much as that's possible.
Yeah, probably saying just forget it is not the right way of saying it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just take a little bit more sort of off of our plate, have a little bit more of an open system, and allow the buyers themselves to actually bid and buy what they think is going to be useful for them.
Yeah.
Then it's kind of more up to us to develop the best games possible, integrate the advertising into our games in the best way possible to bring the most value to the buyers, and show them that the specific user segments that we have and the users that we have as a whole are worthwhile to buy, worthwhile for them.
And Rich, from a day-to-day perspective, do you have anything to add to that other than what Graham Mike's covered?
I mean, I'd say most publishers have their entire infrastructure built up around the waterfall, so it is a really significant change. It's like how you do analytics, how you take a report from whichever tool you use, whether it's in-house or your BI team. I mean, it's a really significant step, and I think publishers need to define what data they need, how they want to optimize it, and what level of control they want to retain. Because if you just replace one black box with another, then you lose the transparency aspect, so you need that data input. But how we analyze it is still a little bit of an unknown, because we don't have that much first-hand experience of it yet. But there's going to be a ton of data that we could use, so it's definitely an exciting time.
Okay. Sorry, John.
Yeah, I would add in, by executing in an auction-based environment, you are able, a bit like the demand side, to mine a ton of data. It's all fed back into the system in real time to help you make decisions on how you segment your audience. You can do A/B testing. So Fyber launched the unified platform called Fyber Fairbid. The second part of that is to launch a platform that supports publishers to help them really understand what's going on inside their own apps, who their users are, which demand sources are bidding the highest and valuing their audiences the most, so then they can present those at a slightly different price point and maximize their yield. Do A/B testing on certain creatives. There's a ton of things you can do, but the whole system is built around monetizing the publisher inventory in a system that moves away from the waterfall. So data obviously driving all the decisioning to get the most out of their yield.
Okay. If we move now and talk about getting new types of advertisers getting the big brands in there, I wouldn't have thought that the arrival of header bidding per se is going to convince brands that aren't currently convinced. So what are their issues? It seems to me the last time I seem to recall that we were talking or writing about this was 4 or 5 years ago, and the argument was, well, no, to us a premium publisher is like the FT or the Guardian. It's not a game. And has nothing changed in the last 5 years?
No.
Right.
It's a massive frustration, I think, for a lot of us, even though we kind of represent the buy side. We're constantly reminding them that the in-app world is different to the desktop world, and we see a lot of our clients will have a 12 or 14,000 long list of whitelisted URLs. They'll have 300 apps. And so we're building out whitelists for them to try and encourage them to spend more money in an app environment, because I think a lot of the clients just don't dedicate the time and resources to the fact that in-app does have a huge number of different bespoke environments that they need to exist in. They're starting to come around to rewarded video and separate that in their mind from incentivized ads from like 2005. And they're starting to understand that, if I'm watching ITV, that's a rewarded video that I'm watching because I get the content in return for watching an ad. How is it different in a game? It's not. And so we're spending a lot of time pushing them to spend. I think we still hear this sort of, the objection that gaming is, all teenage boys, despite the fact that the stats out there show that it's majority female and much older than you would expect, and has been for ages. Yeah. But, we convince the agencies, and we only work with the agencies, and then they have to go and convince their client. And I think it just takes time, and you've just got to keep hammering home these messages. And we're in the process of pulling together some white papers about performance in an app environment to convince our clients, because although mobile is still a sizable chunk of spend through the trade desk, it's nowhere near where it should be. And so we're really, really actively pushing that to all of our clients.
I was talking to Tapjoy a couple of weeks ago, to their CMO, and I playing devil's advocate, I said, a cynic looks at what you do and says you're just bribing people. They need a life, so you're making them watch an ad to get it. He said, yeah, they do say that. He said, but actually, in a world where there's a lot of fraud, things aren't very transparent, it's exactly the opposite. It's just being completely open and saying there's a value exchange here. If you want a life, watch a bit of branded content and you can have it, and it does make them feel good about that content.
That's right. And programmatic buying means that you're making sure you're targeting the right user with your ad. You're not showing a completely irrelevant ad to someone. All the other facets of targeting mean that you should be showing a relevant ad, so it shouldn't be this negative experience for the user where they're, some sort of 18-year-old seeing an ad for nappies that's completely not relevant to them. It should be picking and choosing the user and showing them an ad that will enhance their experience rather than detract from it.
So our two publishers, does this piss you off? Does it keep you awake at night? Or do you have much success in getting household name brands on?
It's a massive challenge.
Apps?
We're 70% of our audience is in app, but we're also a social dating platform, which has a whole nother layer of disagreement and discussion and evangelization. It's a huge investment to really bring it about, and it's not always easy to justify the return. I think it's going to change. I think it is changing. I think header bidding moves us a little bit further along that direction. And rewarded video, I agree, it's massive for us. But ultimately, 90% of rewarded video is still performance, and I think it's not really changing that quickly. But hopefully header bidding or dynamic bidding will move us in that direction a little bit faster.
Mike?
Not really too much to add to that, to be honest. It'd be nice to see sort of, all these big brands actually properly getting involved, I guess. Seeing actually, it's, 2018 and people are in apps now, sort of thing. I think it's just a time thing, really. It's taken time. It's slowly getting there. It's nearly there, and it's just going to take a little bit more time, I think, really, to sort of convince these guys to move in and actually take advantage of what is there, and they're not actually taking advantage of it at the moment.
Jonnie, you made the point earlier that there's a ton of data. Sorry, Joe, I'll come back to you as well, but there's a ton of data, so they can't fall back on measurement and say, it's just not measurable. That's why we don't put money into it.
Well, there is measurability in place. That's a prerequisite of brands moving into in-app. So you've got V-paid inventory. There's a lot more of that in the ecosystem. We've got a ton of it as well. So anything to do with viewability or any metrics at all that brands can use or agencies can use to convince their brands to spend more money is a good thing. So there is measurability in place. So like I said earlier on, you've got people like Double Verify, White Ops on fraud and the like. So you have to have measurability in place in order to get brand dollars in. There is a massive education piece to be done with brands generally. They have a distrust of the mobile ecosystem, but in-app is actually probably the safest place you can put your advertising right now, because it's already pre-screened by the app stores, the SDKs. Integrating them with publishers is a really lengthy process. It's not just a drag and drop SDK. So there's lots of layers of security in app, in particularly, that message needs to get across to the brands. I just don't think the agencies right now are equipped to get that message. So it's an opportunity for us as a business to kind of move that conversation along and convince brands that that's where their users are. And to the whole point about whitelists, it's incredibly frustrating. It's almost like going back in time. We talk about audience targeting a lot, and in the in-app ecosystem, it seems that yes, I love your audience, but I only want to see them on 4 publishers, and then you've got like 4 impressions or something. It's ridiculous. So again, it's about convincing publishers that it's okay. Advertisers. Actually, the gaming environment or any app environment, if the audiences are there, the execution point, which is just the game itself, all you're doing is using the game to get your ad in front of the eyeballs that are in front of that screen. And that's the challenge for us to get that message across.
Joel, you were going to say something earlier.
I'm sadly going to mention GDPR, but I know I promised I wouldn't. I'm sorry, but in a positive sense, I think the way that, say, someone like Fyber upgrades their SDK to handle GDPR and the IAB framework adoption means that every app developer who just adds that SDK, they're ready. And in a desktop environment, we have seen a lot of publishers move far too slowly in their adoption of the IAB framework. So it could be a way that mobile can really take advantage of this lag is more app developers seem ready and transmitting the right signals for GDPR. So now is probably the time to start really pushing with the agencies that you are GDPR compliant.
So yeah, just sorry, I guess you don't want to talk about GDPR, but I am curious. I mean, you've mentioned about all the data you're able to mine and how this is like, very like a part and parcel element of the header bidding environment. But with privacy legislation where it's going, is that value still there in the header bidding environment, or does it impact that value of header bidding?
Can we have the mic down here, please, Mike? Oh, go on, Rich, you first.
Sure, yeah. I mean, for us, every user has the right to opt out of how their data is used and who it's shared with. I don't really think it has a huge impact depending on your business. If you don't have a great value proposition, you might have a negative impact, and therefore you might be in a position where you can't share user data to third parties for in-app advertising. Depending on your approach, you can really minimize the impact in a negative way.
Jonnie, go on, Mike. Let's just, yep.
Yeah, no, pretty much agree with that, to be honest. I mean, obviously the more data we can have about users, the better. But obviously everyone should be free and feel free to opt out if they please. For us, we can still deliver ads in our games one way or another anyway. It's just obviously about how targeted them ads are to the user. In my opinion, it's beneficial for the user because you get better ads, more targeted ads that are more relevant to you. And, of course, for us, that's, more sort of ad dollars at the end. But yeah, overall, I mean, it's not an absolutely huge sort of impact. It's not going to destroy our business by not having data from certain users, but it's, I guess, more annoying than anything, to be honest.
Yeah, John touched on it earlier on. It's much easier for in-app publishers to gain consent, upgrade the SDK, the wordage goes out, they get consent, and that inventory and those users go into the pot, and that's passed down through to the buy side. A lot of the buy side partners are only buying on inventory that has explicit consent, which is, probably we knew that was going to happen. How much of an impact? We don't think it has much at all because it's just much easier process to get consent from buyers. Joel's will argue the fact that it's much harder on the website, and he's been going through that for the last few days. That's why he looks so tired. I want to talk to that, I don't know.
Yeah, any more questions? Any developers out there found a way to get brands advertising in your apps? Tell us how you did it. No? No? Okay, well, one sort of final one to go down the line. Just what the additional implications are. Let's start with Rich at the end and come back to Jonnie. What other implications the introduction of header bidding is going to have in 2018 and beyond?
So I think the guys in the middle, the networks and the mediation platform, as mentioned, have had a lot of pressure. And I think the companies that really jump on this and see it as an opportunity to really change the industry slightly, definitely in the in-app environment, will flourish. And I think the guys that don't really jump on board or come up with different methodologies that are less standardized and don't kind of embrace this opportunity to build trust and transparency might not be around in 12 months. I think they will struggle. Because for us as a publisher, I can say all the solutions that we're being pitched, although they're slightly different, most of them at their core have a really good, strong message that kind of benefits buy and sell side. So we're looking forward to working with those publishers, those platforms and those mediation partners. And I think, there's going to be some change in the industry, definitely.
Yeah, going forwards, I mean, obviously given some time, once, more networks come on board and, hopefully brands start coming on board as well, hopefully it will allow smaller developers, especially obviously for myself being in games, smaller game developers, allow them to sort of self-publish and not have to go into sort of the big publishers and have a little bit more control and freedom over what they do, over sort of their revenue streams, and I guess have a little bit more freedom to really build up their own brands. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the position we're in. We're fortunate to sort of fall into that position really recently, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to working hopefully with Fyber and working closely with them to use in-app header bidding as a really sort of strong solution for our monetization strategy in the games.
Thank you, Joel.
I think I said it right at the beginning, but header bidding is a sign of the maturity of programmatic within the app world. The fact it exists, the fact that people, well, app developers and the buyers want to be able to compete right at the very top of what was previously a waterfall is only going to be a good thing. And if you can give transparency with that, if you can make a safe environment, and now it's measurable, it might not get the brand dollars in, but once they're in, it will keep them there because they can actually do what they want to do and buy premium impressions and track and measure everything they're doing. Okay, and Jonnie.
Yeah, just to add to that point, I think we're going to see a redistribution of buying amongst demand partners. So stuff that was previously unavailable will now be made available to the demand partners. So CPMs might change a little bit, but you're going to be spending more money on quality inventory, stuff that was previously only available to the ad networks. So you're also going to see more a proliferation of different campaigns coming into the publishers as well, which means an additional revenue stream. So campaigns that were previously just outside of that environment being brought into it, there's going to be more ad dollars of a different type coming in. Good, excellent. If there are no more questions from the audience, one last shout. We will leave it there. So panel, can I ask you to give a warm round of applause to our panel? Thank you, guys.